I'm Derek Fildebrandt, publisher of the Western Standard, and you're watching The Pipeline today on January 15th, 2025. I actually wrote 2024, just out of habit, still on my my little notepad here. I am...
Got to move with the times, Derek.
We do.
Mm-hmm.
They're changing. I'm joined, as usual, by Western Standard opinion editor Nigel Hannaford.
Always moving with the times.
Indeed. Corey is not with us right now. He's somewhere warmer than Calgary. So we've gone to somewhere a little warmer than Calgary, although it's pretty nice right now. But joining us today remotely from Vancouver is Western Standard Bureau Chief Jarryd Jaeger, also managing editor of West Coast Standard. Thanks for joining us, Jarryd.
Yeah, nice to be here.
All right. Well, before we get started, though, I want to thank our sponsor. This episode of The Pipeline is sponsored by New World Precious Metals, based right here in Alberta. Years of inflationary money printing and rising debt have decimated the average Canadian's savings. Gold and silver are the only currencies that have held their value for thousands of years. Last year saw 30% gains. New World Precious Metals offers unique platforms that help to protect and grow your hard-earned wealth with gold and silver. So check them out at newworldpm.com. That's newworldpm.com. Okay, well, we're going to be the main theme today is the rest versus the West. The plan that is currently developing right now, kind of as we speak today, of Canada's retaliation in the very near trade war that is coming up when Donald Trump is sworn in as, again, President of the United States. The retaliatory, what is Canada's retaliation going to be? And most of that tends to revolve around making Alberta pay. And to some extent, Saskatchewan pay the burden of that retaliation. We're going to be talking about that. We'll also be talking about the poison chalice that is the Liberal Party's leadership race. Can anything stop Mark Carney? Will it even be a race? Who knows? The Liberals are in a bit of a crisis. They might just decide to coronate someone like they did with Michael Ignatieff. Speaking of Michael Ignatieff, Mark Carney. All right, so we're going to start with our main story right now. Today, the premiers and the prime minister met. It might actually be the first time that Justin Trudeau's actually met with all the premiers. He's generally avoided doing so. If he has done it, it's been a long time.
Probably made it a little easier that two of them, including Danielle Smith, came in over Zoom. The close proximity wasn't quite so unnerving.
It wasn't quite as awkward in the room. You know, Canadians tend to be, we can be real jerks online, but face-to-face, we tend to be a bit more polite. But the relationship between Justin Trudeau and Danielle Smith is awkward, to say the least. So yeah, probably made it a bit easier that she was there via Zoom or however she was attending. But you know, this all opened up earlier today with Doug Ford. You know, let's put a picture of Doug Ford up wearing this hat. His Canada's Not for Sale hat, kind of a Trumpian. I hate how everyone says, "Oh, that's being Trumpian." That's like Trump. But I mean, he was borrowing the baseball cap, political, visible messaging thing. So you know, somewhat pioneered by or made famous by Donald Trump.
But I actually would like to know where that hat was made, because he was bloviating towards the end of the press conference about how we've got to get things made in Canada. Where was that hat made?
You know what? Right now, I know one of our reporters is watching. She should make a note of that. I want to know where Doug Ford's hat was made. They don't tend to make things like that in Canada and Ontario. The hat itself is likely made overseas. The printing of it, maybe the printing of the messaging on the hat was done in Canada, but I'm highly doubtful that that hat is made in Canada, because it makes no economic sense for us to actually make these things here anymore. But that's a very, very good point that I know someone behind the camera here has just taken very wise note of. But okay, so back to it. The real big issue right now is Canada does have to retaliate. You know, Trump puts in tariffs. We're going to have to do something back, because it's not just some bad policies we have, like border security, et cetera, anymore. He he wants tariffs. And so we're going to have to retaliate. That much I think is pretty clear. The problem is that if you really want to hit the Americans where it hurts, there's one pretty clear answer how to do that, and that is Alberta and, to a lesser extent, Saskatchewan oil. The trade deficit that Donald Trump talks about doesn't really exist. I don't think he's gone into the numbers here. If you removed oil exports to the United States is actually in a huge trade surplus with Canada. Canadians, if you exclude oil and gas, Canadians buy significantly more from the United States than the United States buys from Canada. But we export a huge amount of oil to the United States, which is why there's technically a trade deficit. But the United States, because they're our only real customer, and Ottawa for decades has been less than helpful at getting pipelines built across Canada and to the coasts, we have to sell our oil at a huge discount. So the Americans buy it dirt cheap, and then they get to refine it and upgrade it and add value to it for themselves and for export. It's a good deal for America. And if you want to hit America, there really is the obvious thing to do is you put an exit tax on Alberta oil, or you refuse to pump Alberta oil. Now, that latter option of turning off the tap to America, that's all bluster, because if you look at the map, actually, let's put that map up on the screen. That map shows that to get Alberta oil to Eastern Canada, it has to go through the United States first. Now, if only someone had proposed some kind of Energy East pipeline that would bypass the United States to get there. So that option's off the table. But what's really being talked about right now, Nigel, is probably an exit tax on Alberta oil to hurt the United States. But that would be really making human shields, economic human shields, out of Alberta and Saskatchewan to protect the manufacturing that's being hit by tariffs in Ontario and Quebec.
Well, that is such an obvious, easy hit. It just happens to be that if it is applied, then it's Alberta, Saskatchewan that pay the price. And the way the auto industry runs in Eastern Canada, the chassis of any given vehicle goes backwards and forwards across the line several times. The engine goes in here, the back axle goes in there, it goes over here to be painted, back and forth across the border at Windsor, Detroit. So just the accounting would be a nightmare. But more to the point, if you actually try to put a stop to that, say, no, we're not going to do it anymore. First of all, it's Ontario that gets hit, which in the Canadian pantheon of priorities is just the worst possible outcome. And secondly, you're going to get a very fast and immediate response from the United States policy decision to move the entire auto manufacturing enterprise back over the border to Detroit, Michigan. They'd be very glad to do that, actually. So that's probably not going to happen in any practical way. The thing with turning off the Alberta oil is that not only is the effect immediate, it is also a particular type of oil that their refineries are set up to crack. And, you know, you can get it from Venezuela, I guess, but nobody really wants to deal with Venezuela. And it still takes a little time to turn the ship around. So the immediate impact of turning off the taps to the United States is an extremely attractive option for those who want to make a fist and get into a serious trade war with the United States. Problem is, it's very localized in its effect. And notwithstanding all the talk we heard about 20 minutes ago about how the effects of any trade war are going to be shared around and it's all going to be very fair and equitable, you know darn well it's not going to be fair and equitable. It's going to be at Alberta's expense. And that's why I think the Premier is so concerned, and she should be so concerned, and so should every Albertan who has hopes of doing well in this part of the world.
Jarryd, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith has got some options on the table, and you know, I was noodling this around actually with Nigel about some of the actions we could take, and all of them were pretty radical things that we would have to do to retaliate against Ottawa, because you know I was going to say at this point, but actually historically Ottawa has been a more hostile foreign power to us than the United States. The United States actually tends to take our products and happy for us to make money. Ottawa historically much less consistently so. But one of the options she is preparing behind the scenes, according to some reports, and this is quite ingenious, is that if Ottawa slaps an exit tax on Alberta oil and Saskatchewan oil going into the United States, that she will circumvent it by the Alberta government actually buying all of the oil and then shipping it to the United States. Because constitutionally, one order of government in Canada cannot tax another. The federal government could tax our oil when it crosses international boundaries. They have that power. It'd be extraordinarily unfair and unjust, but they could legally do so. But they couldn't tax Alberta oil going south if it's owned by the government of Alberta. Your thoughts on this is, it's funny. There's the Canadian retaliation to Washington and then the Alberta retaliation against Ottawa. Your thoughts?
It's been very interesting to watch, and it's nice to see the premiers kind of, take the lead on this, because obviously the government in Ottawa is almost leaderless. And I mean, Trudeau, he's there, but we know that it's the premiers who are going to be pushing the solutions. And we've seen in British Columbia, Premier Eby, he's pushed back pretty hard against Trump's claim that there's nothing in Canada that the U.S. needs. For example, yesterday he proposed maybe cutting off supply of rare minerals that the U.S. needs for night vision goggles and other electronics. And the thing with these minerals is you can only find them in BC or in China. And the U.S. has said they're not going to do that business with China. So it's pretty much Canada or nothing.
Yeah. So, rare minerals it's far down after oil, but rare minerals is one of the major strategic ways that Canada could hit back against these tariffs. And that would disproportionately hurt British Columbia. Although, as a proportion of its economy, rare minerals are, pretty small fish compared to oil relative to Alberta's economy. But it is significant, and it is a way to punch back. Nigel, I could see, so you were alluding to the press conference held at the end of the First Minister's meeting today.
Yes.
Where they said, the burden will be shared. So if one part of the country is disproportionately affected by retaliatory measures against the United States' tariffs, then we're going to have to find a way to join together and help each other. That was pretty ill-defined. But let's say, for sake of argument, the federal government decides, okay, we're going to cut off rare minerals to the United States as a part of this retaliation. Okay. The federal government could theoretically then step into those companies and say, we're going to make you whole. How much were you making per month before this? And we're just going to pay you that in the meantime. And the BC government, how much were you making?
And nobody loses their job.
Yeah, everyone, you're just going to get furloughed. Everyone stays at home and gets paid. And the BC government, we're going to make you whole on the royalties that you would otherwise get from it. Okay. Well, it would be very expensive to do that, even just for rare earth minerals. But there is no way in hell Ottawa could make things whole to Alberta and Saskatchewan, Newfoundland, but particularly Alberta. It's such a gargantuan amount of money. We're talking hundreds of billions of dollars USD a year. For the federal, the Trudeau's already doubled the size of the federal debt in his time in office. The deficit is wildly out of control. It's not going to be very long till creditors start getting pretty itchy around our balance sheet. We simply don't have the physical capacity for Ottawa to step in and say, okay, well, we're going to cut off Alberta's oil to the United States, but we're going to make Alberta oil companies whole. Essentially, we're just going to give you money for not producing, and we're going to make the Alberta government whole for the royalties it's missing. Even if Ottawa wanted to be that generous to us, they simply couldn't. They don't have the money. It's simply not physically possible.
That's so true. And it was actually frustrating to listen to that particular press conference and realize that all this is based upon borrowing money. Mm-hmm. There is not the money to pay for it. The only way to do what Ottawa is talking about, or more particularly what Mr. Trudeau is talking about, is to borrow money. Well, they have borrowed what, $700 billion in the past 10 years. They've given it out as CERB. They've given it out in so many different
Add to
directions.
that, most of the Harper government was also under deficit as well. Some of them pretty significant. They got to a balanced budget at the very end of it, but essentially one balanced budget in 20 years almost here.
Oh, no. It was better than that. It's considerably better than that. What actually happened? They had a
we were in
balanced
deficit from
budget
2008 until the very end of the Harper government.
Well, which
he
is
balanced it at the
2014, so 15 was the end. But I mean, don't forget, we had the Great Recession in 2008.
Regardless of cause, though, Canada's been borrowing money for 20 years.
Yeah, but not at that rate.
No, not it's massively accelerated under Trudeau. But we have not been paying down our debt for 20 years. We're not in a position.
I'm going from memory here, Derek, but it seems to me that the Harper government put on about $65 billion in debt over a period of 2008 to 2000.
Trudeau was that in a year. I know.
And that was just
I know
was just last year's
I know
overhaul.
you're defending the record of the Harper government here.
But as a matter of fact,
what I'm saying is Canada has not been balancing its budget or significantly paying down its debt for 20 years.
Let's say that Mr. Trudeau has not been paying down the debt for 10 years.
This is not the topic of what we're talking about today, but Stephen Harper borrowed much more money than he paid down on the debt. And he was overall a fairly reasonable and responsible fiscal manager. Mm-hmm. But he borrowed much more than he paid down on the debt. And that's just arithmetic.
And so?
What I'm saying is Canada has not been running balanced budgets for 20 years. The last 10 of those 20 years, we have borrowed incredibly recklessly with total abandon and out even the pretense of getting back to a balanced budget at some point. So we are not in any position now to open up the spigots again on a scale that would be even greater than the borrowing that took place under COVID. We have not been responsible for a long period of time here, and we simply don't have the fiscal capacity to spend like this, even if we thought it was a good idea.
You actually have to go back to the 60s before the last century before you get to the sequence of balanced budgets.
No, 1990s.
Well, Mr.
In the first half of the 2000s.
Yeah, Trudeau. How much do you want to know about the history of the national debt?
We're not. I know this pretty inside and out, Nigel, but we're not debating the last time we've been. This is not the.
This is not a well-run country.
No, and we simply don't have the capacity to borrow like this.
I agree.
We've already maxed out the credit card, and now we're talking about taking on new credit cards.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly what they're talking about. They're not saying it, but that's what they're talking about.
Jarryd, what was your impression from David Eby with the First Minister's meeting today?
I thought he made some good points, looked pretty strong. But I think, like you guys are pointing out, like, rare minerals in BC, that's small fish compared to, oil in Alberta and everything that Ontario has to offer. So I think when it comes down to it, it's going to be Alberta and Ontario that we see the most action coming out of this.
So let's talk about some of the things. Canada might just put in place a 25% tariff against the United States. I think that's probably the main given is, okay, they do 25% against us, we're going to do 25% against them. I actually can live with that. I mean, it's bad. We shouldn't, these trade wars are stupid to begin with. We shouldn't be in it. Trump might be good for the United States, but this action is not good for us, obviously. But he's not the president of Canada. He is the incoming president of the United States, and they're all about America first. So, fine. I can live with a 25% tariff on American goods coming into Canada as a retaliation until we can finally come to some resolution, hopefully one day. But the problem is that we're the mosquito getting shot with a cannon. We simply cannot retaliate. Our 25% tariff against them will annoy them. It will hurt them a bit. But their tariff against us will kill us. It'll absolutely devastate Canada, which is why Ontario, Quebec, and by extension, Ottawa are looking at more targeted measures in addition to a blanket tariff. And that is Alberta Energy. And Saskatchewan. I don't know, Nigel, what's the fight back strategy for this? Because, the left-wing media, subsidized by Ottawa, has been pretty, they've been saying some nasty things about Danielle Smith. The Toronto Star just last night said Danielle Smith is essentially a traitor. Alberta Oil is responsible for the fire in Los Angeles. And if Alberta really wants to keep on increasing its oil production, maybe it should just join the United States. Now, that's probably that Toronto Star article by Gillian Stewart is probably the outer reach of the craziness coming from the legacy media here. But the tone has been that Alberta's not playing on Team Canada. Alberta's being selfish here. And that was echoed by Doug Ford a bit more diplomatically, but he echoed it himself at the opening of the First Minister's meeting today, that the provinces need to put their own interests aside. It's about Canada first. Well, it's about the country first. Well, the problem is when the premiers of Ontario and Quebec or the Prime Minister of Canada speak, normally they're talking about Ontario and Quebec first. And the outlying hinterlands of the country, well, they just need to take one for the team.
Where were they when we were being attacked by the federal government? I mean, look, in the end, I suppose it's what's going to happen, but let's not pretend that it's what ought to happen or that it is fair. In 2016, Alberta lost more than 100,000 jobs from the energy sector as a consequence of actions dictated in Eastern Canada. It was the Liberal government that was the executor, but because they pursued the policies that they did, many head offices from international oil companies went back to where they came from. Investment was cut off. Something like $80 billion worth of projects were canceled in 1 year alone. I forget what the final figure was, but it was an absolutely massive depreciation of industry here in Alberta. And the point is, that I would like you to think about is, where were the Eastern premiers at that time when Alberta was suffering? Did anybody raise their voice and say, actually having a pipeline to Eastern Canada would be a good idea? Mr. Trudeau, maybe you shouldn't be doing what you're doing. Did anybody in Quebec say, actually, it makes a great idea to bring oil here and we can refine, that can be refined in New Brunswick? No, they put a block on taking an Alberta pipeline across Quebec. So there's a lot of one-sidedness on this, and if Albertans are mad about it, I don't blame them.
Jarryd, this is I just thought of another fun twist to the pipeline saga. So let's put the map up again of the pipelines across North America. So, obviously the premiers of Ontario and Quebec and Justin Trudeau are toying with the idea of turning off the taps of Alberta's oil and Saskatchewan's oil going to the United States. Look at the map. They literally can't do it. And so I'm in a really weird way kind of grateful that Energy East wasn't built, that they can't turn it off. Now, if they turned it off, I think it would behoove Danielle Smith to turn off the oil pipelines to Eastern Canada anyway. So Energy East might not have saved it anyway. But look on the West Coast. This is where I'm coming to you in a second, Jarryd. Is there was a lot of opposition to the Northern Gateway pipeline going to the West Coast. Saskatchewan is the only non-major oil-producing province that could end up with Alberta oil, theoretically, to keep its cars running, to keep its houses warm, to keep any number of products still functioning. And there was sizable opposition to the Northwest, to the Northern Gateway pipeline. But all of a sudden, British Columbia's got to be looking at that pipeline right now, Jarryd, thinking, kind of glad we have that now.
Yeah, no, for sure. And, this whole saga, it makes me think, how are the other provinces going to think about Alberta oil going forward? Might it change how they interact with the province? And might we see some more of these projects being built? Only time will tell, but yeah, it's really putting things in perspective for the other premiers right now.
Before we move on, I want to come back to that beautifully idiotic column from Gillian Stewart in the Toronto Star. She is the local viceroy representing Toronto. Sorry, I was referring to Trans Mountain. I was not Northern Gateway. I was referring to Trans Mountain. Sorry. Yes, I was referring to the Trans Mountain pipeline earlier. So I want to come back to that beautifully idiotic column from Gillian Stewart. In it, she criticized, she blamed the LA fire on Alberta Oil and Danielle Smith and conservatives. The narrative. But then, criticized Danielle Smith and Alberta's government for wanting to double oil production. How dare we try to actually make money without government subsidies in Alberta? That's such an Albertan thing to do. You should be more like Ontario and build government-subsidized EV batteries for cars that absolutely no one wants to buy anymore. But said, if Alberta really wants to double its production, maybe it should just become the 51st state and join the United States and leave Canada. And it's just things that make you go, Like, think that through, Toronto Star. What would happen to Canada if Alberta took you up on the offer? I'm pretty sure Donald Trump would jump at it in a nanosecond. It's like, oh, actually better than Canada would be just taking Alberta. Let's get all the oil. Let's get the wealthiest province of Canada. It would turn British Columbia into a northern East Prussia exclave. It would bankrupt Canada overnight. It's almost hard to respond to something this idiotic, Nigel, but it's for fun. Your thoughts on the Toronto Star here?
Well, if we're just talking about having fun, we've got some municipal elections coming up. Let's put it on the ballot. All across Alberta. Do you want to be part of America? I think the issue will have been long resolved by then, but as long as we're just talking about having fun, and also while we're talking about having fun, I think Gillian Stewart made her political orientation very clear back in the days when she was managing editor of the Calgary Herald before Conrad Black bought the paper back in about 1997, 98. And those were the days when you had a very left-wing newspaper serving what was then a very right-wing city. So don't take her too seriously. To be fair, she probably doesn't take me that seriously.
Well,
but
I don't think Albertans take her very seriously. But she is the
stupid column. Okay,
yeah,
that's what we're really saying here. It was a stupid.
She is the voice
of
the Toronto Star and the outpost of Alberta.
To try and equate Alberta oil with wildfires in California is just,
Yeah, I'd like her to just walk through the thought experiment of, let's take you up on that, Toronto Star. Yeah, okay, you don't want our oil and us in it. Let's just see how that works out for you. Yeah. Okay. All right, we're gonna switch now to our next headline here. The Liberal leadership race, such as it is. I guess there are technically two declared candidates. One of which I've barely heard of, the other of which I have never heard of. There's Gould. What's her first name?
Karina.
I don't know. It was
Karina. Ends with an E.
I've almost never heard of her. She is the House leader for the Liberals in the House of Commons. It's essentially the person who kind of quarterbacks question period, organizes things on the ground. It's a big deal in the House of Commons, but people outside of a legislature have no idea who a House leader is. She's got 0.0 national profile. I don't know a thing about her other than that she's a Liberal and an MP and their House leader. Next, we can disregard her. Not a serious contender. The other one, I can't even name him. He is a deep backbench MP from Ottawa, representing Nepean on the west side of the city. He was asked on the CBC, do you speak French? He said, no. But if you listen to him, he also barely speaks English. He's an immigrant to Canada, which is fine, but he's not actually been in Canada all that long to be running for prime minister. But he's a citizen, so he legally can. But, you should probably speak at least one official language fairly proficiently. Although some people said that about Jean Chrétien, that he spoke neither well. But disregard those two. The race now with Christy Clark's kind of disastrous soft launch, where she ended up lying about her history with membership in the Conservative Party and the Liberal Party. She crashed and burned real fast, so it never got off the ground. all eyes are really just on two names, Chrystia Freeland and Mark Carney. Mark Carney is going to be launching his campaign probably within 24 hours or so. But he soft launched his campaign, all but saying, when a politician says, well, stand by, I'll have an announcement soon. You know that thing. He did that with Jon Stewart on The Daily Show just the other night. Let's roll a small clip from that.
Let's say the candidate wasn't part of the government. Let's say the candidate did have a lot of economic experience. Let's say the candidate did deal with crises. Let's say the candidate had a plan to deal with the challenges in the here and now.
Sneaky. You're running as an outsider.
I am an outsider.
Okay, so we showed you one short clip. The whole thing was 20-odd minutes long, so I don't want to take anything out of context here. I don't think we are. I'd say he was actually a fairly smooth interviewer. It was boring, but he didn't have the Backpfeifengesicht, the punchable face that Justin Trudeau had. He has that going for him. He does not have a punchable face, which is the next Liberal leader. The Liberals would be smart to punch a leader without one. But to choose a leader without one. Freudian slip.
Yeah, you're thinking in German and speaking in English. It can happen there.
Verdammt. But he was overall, I think, a reasonably well, if we're trying not to be partisan here, it was a fine interview. But that part there, Jon Stewart doesn't know the intricacies of Canadian politics, so I can forgive him for it. But not calling him out when he says, I'm an outsider. Nigel, you've got a piece on this. Tell us just how much of an outsider Mark Carney is.
Well, he's not an outsider at all. He's a consummate insider. Look, he has been a bank governor, not only in Canada, but in Great Britain. He is a member and associates with about 5 international organizations, all of which share a common view of something that Mr. Carney is deeply interested in, which is, of course, is climate change and cutting the production of carbon to apparently to ameliorate that. So he's in with the World Economic Forum, he's in with the Bloomberg group, he's in with the Chatham House. There's a list. Read my column. They're all listed there. And these are where the the Bilderbergers, that's the other one.
And the UN Special Envoy
and he's the UN Special Envoy on climate change. So, he's about as in as he can be with that. But in addition, he has also been special advisor to the Prime Minister at the time of COVID. So if you don't like what was done during the COVID era, you probably have to ask or wonder or be suspicious of, because it's never been fully revealed, what was the influence of Mark Carney when the federal government was making regulations to control the spread of COVID. And then since, I think, was it about April of last year, he has been back as a special advisor. Like, this is not a guy who gets his phone calls returned. This is a guy that the federal government phones when they want to know what to do. So that's the relationship. And I think Michelle Rempel-Garner put it beautifully when she said in, I think it was a Substack article that she wrote, I know I stole the line, and I thank you very much for it, Michelle, if you're watching, but he's not in the club, he runs the club. So he is not an outsider. He's the shoe-in boy.
Before we go to the other major likely contender for the leadership, Chrystia Freeland, I'm going to go to you, Jarryd, or the major third candidate who is no longer the third major likely candidate. For some time, Christy Clark, former BC Liberal Premier Christy Clark, has been trying to pave the way, putting up the flag. She's been putting up the flag for like a year or so, as it became clear to anyone whose name is not Justin Trudeau that Justin Trudeau should probably not lead the Liberals into the next election. She's been putting up the flag saying, well, keep me in mind, folks. I'm here, And she was very much gearing up for a run. She was organized. She had gotten her donors behind her. She had assembled her campaign team. And then she went on the CBC, and every once in a while, CBC does its job. And they did their job there. They had receipts for her claims that she's a lifelong liberal and never been a member of the Conservative Party. And for those not in British Columbia, the term liberal is a nebulous and confusing term. Yes, it means liberal, but it also used to also mean some conservatives as well.
Not NDP.
Yeah, in BC, on the provincial level, it meant not full NDP. Jarryd, why don't you just give us, just kind of lay it out beyond what I've done here about Christy Clark's plan to run. I think it would have been safe to say she would have been a credible and major contender for the leadership. She could have won. Possibly would have been their best bet. She's probably the least far left of them. But lay out, where her campaign was going and how it's so disastrously went off the rails and essentially crumbled in the span of 5 minutes.
So yeah, like you were saying, she was doing a great job for the past year or so, putting out some good messages, and especially on Twitter, she was acting as if she was going to be running, even before there was a leadership race announced. But then, like you said, in a span of 10 minutes, she kind of burnt it all to the ground. And it was completely unnecessary, too. If she had said, yeah, I was a member of the party back then, but now, that's behind me. Now I'm ready to lead the Liberals. I think people would have forgiven her. But after coming out, and a week before, like the day of Trudeau's resignation, she said on Twitter, as a lifelong Liberal. And then just days later, it comes out that she was a member of the Conservative Party back in 2022. Not only that, but she actively endorsed Jean Charest for leadership.
Let's just, sorry to interrupt, but just for context here, she took out a Conservative Party membership to support the former Liberal Premier of Quebec to become the federal Conservative leader. It's all very incestuous between federal Conservatives and provincial Liberals. It's all pretty messy.
Yeah. And I don't know what she was hoping to achieve when she went on the CBC and just outright lied, because she knew. You could tell she knew, because she was asked, have you ever been a member of the Conservative Party? And she just outright said, oh, never. And in today's day and age, all the records are there. And within minutes, the Conservative Party had all the information, sent it to the CBC.
Yeah.
And that was that. She tried to apologize. She went on Twitter saying, I misspoke. It's like, no, you lied.
Yes, sometimes we misspeak. I misspeak probably, my fair share of times.
It's like old McCarthy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Are you now, or have you ever been a member of the Conservative Party?
Well, I mean, it's a fair question. It was a big issue against Jean Charest that he used to be the Liberal Premier of Quebec, and many Conservatives didn't want a Liberal leader of the Conservative Party.
Well, but he was a Conservative before that.
A progressive Conservative, yeah. So it's a fair, I'm not one, but, spoiler, but it's fair for Liberals to say, oh, well, we don't want a Conservative as the Liberal leader. Okay. But also, she could have explained it away. Yeah, well, I was voting for a Liberal to become the Conservative leader. That's why I took a Conservative Party membership. And it was unnecessary. It could have been very reasonably explained away. But you know who had the proof? Not her political allies. The Conservative Party of Canada had that. Jenny Byrne, essentially the woman who, the right-hand woman of Pierre Poilievre, she has the receipt. She put it out, and that just cooked Christy Clark. She blamed it on, she said her reason for running is, there's just not enough time to run. I mean, it's a short race, very short race, granted. But also, my French just isn't good enough. Are you buying the French excuse there, Jarryd?
No, not at all. And to contrast what she said with what Chandra Arya said, I think it's a pretty lame excuse to say, oh, my French just wasn't good enough, when some of the other candidates are just openly declaring that I'm not even going to bother to speak French.
Well, to be fair, those candidates have no chance.
True.
Christy Clark would have been running as a major, actual serious contender. She's not Gould, and she's not, as Paul Wells puts it, that guy. no one
it
knows.
still seemed like a bit of a cop-out to me.
Yeah, it was obviously a cop-out. All right, well, we're going to turn to our parting shots now. Actually, I don't know, Jarryd, were you prepared for parting shots? Kind of our last final thoughts that have not been mentioned here. I'm going to let you go last so you can think about it if you haven't done your homework. And that might be my fault for not even telling you we're making you do this. Nigel, your parting shot.
Well, I'm just actually mesmerized by this decision to deploy the Black Hawk helicopter on the border. First of all, as you said this morning, it's amazing that the RCMP can round up a couple of helicopters in a week when it takes us 30 years to order a replacement for the Sea King. But beyond that, I mean, this is a true fighting machine. If you go on and look at Black Hawks on YouTube, they're black, they're wide. There's lots of photographs of them stacked with rocket launchers and machine guns, and I dare say that won't be part of the package that on the border. But
If you want to really defend the border, they should have some rockets.
Well, they've got the hard points to mount them later if needed.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just amazed by that choice, but I am impressed by the fact that they got them so quickly.
Yeah. All right, I want to point out that some of Trump's trade war is likely to be very positive for Canada. There is some silver lining here. One is he is likely to demand that Canada scrap the Online News Act. You guys, regular watchers and listeners, will know how much I and the Western Standard passionately hate this grifting piece of legislation. The idea was not to break up Facebook and Google's monopoly on online advertising, which would be a potentially worthy venture, but it was instead to cash in on their monopolies, take money from Facebook or Meta and Google, and give it to lazy, bankrupt Canadian news publishers. Google gave them a little bit of money, and Facebook, quite rightfully, said, piss off, we want nothing to do with it, we're going to block the news in Canada. Well, I think it seems likely Trump is going to put that on the agenda as an anti-trade measure that Canada is going to have to get rid of. I think Pierre Poilievre want to get rid of it anyway, so that's an easy one. But the really good one is the big cheese. If there is anything crazy about trade and consumers in Canada, is that it is damn near illegal for us to get foreign cheese. We have to pay massive, massive tariffs to bring in dairy from anywhere outside of Canada because of our supply-managed Soviet-style command and control economy over the dairy sector. That is some damn low-hanging fruit. So if you're a dairy farmer watching this right now, it's coming to an end. You're going to have to compete very likely within the next year on a North American market, the protected Canadian supply management Soviet system. I'm going to call it right now. It's going to be one of the first things to die in trade because there is no defense of it. And the people it hurts worst are not American dairy producers who can't send to Canada. It's Canadian consumers. I'm a father with 2 kids. One of them's very young and drinks over probably a gallon of milk a day. The other one drinks probably a gallon of milk. Yeah, we go through a 2 to 4 gallons a day of milk in my house. And it cost racks up pretty high. And I'm doing it to put someone else's kid through college. So the good news of the trade war is going to be the end of the Online News Act and supply management of dairy. It's going to be good for cheese eaters in Canada. Jarryd, your parting shot.
Well, thinking back on it now, I think the implosion of Christy Clark's campaign could be the best thing that happens to the Conservative Party, because she was kind of a more moderate voice. She could have led the Liberals in a new direction and maybe gained some more votes. But now we have, what do they call him, Carbon Tax Carney and Chrystia Freeland, who has been pretty much tied to Trudeau for the past few years. And so when you have those two options, it's, you're going to get less people voting for the Liberals than you would have if a more moderate voice had come in. So I think with Clark out of the race now, we're going to see an even bigger conservative win. And in the end, I hope that'll be better for the country.
You know what? I'm going to give myself a second little final parting shot here, just because you mentioned, the Conservatives have tried to brand Mark Carney as Carbon Tax Carney. It's a very unimaginative nickname. I feel like Donald Trump would come up with a way better nickname for him. His last name is Carney, like a guy who works at the carnival, like scary carnies. I'm sorry if any actual carnies are watching, unless your name's Mark. But I mean, I haven't got one yet, but I feel like Donald Trump would have a much better nickname for the circus carney or something like that.
Clown show carney.
Clown show carney. There you go. look at the Donald here, Donald Jaeger. All right. Well, that's, you're welcome, Conservative Party. We're trademarking it right now. You're going to have to pay royalties for using that one. All right. Jarryd, Nigel, thank you very much for joining.
It was a pleasure.
And thank all of you for joining us today on The Pipeline. Remember, the Western Standard is one of the very, very few genuinely independent publications left in Canada that refuse to take Justin Trudeau's federal media bailout subsidy with your tax dollars. We need you to support us. To support us and to get past the pesky paywall and get all Western Standard content, go to westernstandard.news right now. Click on subscribe. It's only $10 a month or $100 a year. You're going to love it. Thank you very much for joining us today. God bless.